Hey there everyone, this is Samuel Johnson, and welcome to what will possibly be the final episode of the MCU Perspectives, Sony Edition. And today we're going to be discussing the sixth film to be released as part of Sony's universe of Marvel characters, aka the Spider-Man superhero universe, Kraven the Hunter. And of course, since this is Kraven's first solo film, I should get into my experience with the character prior to seeing it. And well, my first exposure to Kraven the Hunter was, like various other Spider-Man villains, through the DVD extras from the first Sam Raimi Spider-Man movie. Specifically, on disc 2 of the DVDs, they had galleries on all of Spider-Man's various villains, and of course, Kraven the Hunter was one of those villains. And well, he seemed like an alright villain. He was a hunter that hunted Spider-Man because he actually thought there was thrill in hunting someone like the Webhead. And from there, my exposure to Kraven after that was just through his various appearances in shows, video games, and comics. And in all of them, I thought he looked like a pretty cool villain. He basically, unlike all of Spider-Man's other villains, he was a very educated villain. He was classy, he knew his stuff, and he wasn't just a thug for the sake of being a thug. He was just he was a guy with his own self-interest, and while at the end of the day his motivation was simply the thrill of the hunt, at the same time he had standards to him, and it made him for a much more compelling Spider-Man villain. And some of Spidey's best stories actually did come out of Kraven the Hunter's existence. One of the best ones being Kraven's Last Hunt, where Kraven was dying because of all these toxins that he had taken to keep himself strong, and as such to try and go out on one final hurrah, he managed to shoot Spider-Man, bury him alive, and then started going around taking out criminals dressed as the Webhead just to try and prove he could do the job better before he wound up shooting himself in the head. Basically, Kraven was a guy who had a lot more to him, and as a result, I feel like that he was probably one of the few Spider-Man villains besides Venom who could have worked in his own solo movie. The problem is that when previews for this movie started first coming out, I admit I was a little iffy. I didn't go into these previews thinking that this film was going to be awful, but I did look at them all with slight hesitation. Partially because every time I saw previews for Kraven, I was let me put it this way. It checked enough boxes for me that it felt like they were trying to do Kraven justice, but it also felt like they were still trying to push Kraven into a similar role that they pushed Venom or Morbius into. Basically, a character that's normally a villain being thrown into the role of an anti-hero. And the thing is, while Kraven as a character would fit more into that role than a lot of other Spider-Man villains, he's still predominantly a villain. He has standards to him, but he is still a villain. Unless you're talking about Hunter Spider, who is a version of Kraven the Hunter who wound up becoming his world Spider-Man. But that's another thing altogether. We're not talking about that. My point is, Kraven the Hunter, as a character, felt like someone that really didn't... I don't know. There was potential for him to be an anti-hero, but at the same time, with what we were shown here, we were kind of shown two clashing images at once, as it felt like they were trying to make Kraven come across as just another anti-hero that would basically be able to fit into this growing universe of characters that Sony wanted to do with all these Spider-Man related characters and all that stuff. But at the same time, it felt like they were still trying to keep Kraven as that brutal hunter that he was in the comics, and quite frankly, both of those images sadly cannot coexist. As a result, does the end product end up being something that I think is worth watching? Well, let me put it this way. Apparently, this was the worst grossing film opening weekend compared to all of Sony's other films in this universe. And my local theater stopped showing this film after 2 weeks. I had to go to a theater that was further away just to be able to do it for this vlog. So I think that kind of is telling to the quality of this film as a whole. With that said, do I recommend it personally? Well, let's take a look at it and find out, as today we'll be looking at what is possibly the final film in Sony's universe of Marvel characters, Kraven the Hunter. And before I get to the long-ass plot summary, 2 warnings. 1, I took notes while I was watching this movie, so there may be times when I go back and refer to this if I need help remembering certain details and so forth. And also, despite the fact that this film is probably going to be out of theaters within a couple more weeks, spoilers are inbound. If you haven't seen this movie at all, and don't want to go in spoiled, turn away now, because I'm spoiling it rotten, and like I said, this film has only been out in theaters for 2 weeks. So, again, if you want to go in unspoiled, go away and come back when you've already seen the movie, or if you just stop caring. Are we good? Alright, so with all of that away, let's get to the long-ass plot summary. And for a film called Kraven the Hunter, our main character is Sergei Kravenov. Wait, okay, yeah. He does end up calling himself Kraven later, but his real name is Sergei Kravenov. And 16 years prior to the events of the movie, he and his brother Dmitri were attending a prep school in New York, and I don't want to say they were delinquents, but they were your typical teenage boys, just kind of doing their own thing, getting into trouble, bonding, while also having a shitty dad. While they're at school, just doing their own thing, one of their teachers calls them and tells them their dad, a Mr. Nikolai Romanov, is here to come pick the two boys up, which confuses the two because they're wondering if they did anything wrong. But upon getting into their dad's limo, they end up talking with him, and he reveals that part of the reason he's picking them both up is because their mother, or more specifically, Kraven's mother, has killed herself. So, yeah, that doesn't exactly help Sergei, especially considering that he kind of blames his dad for this, because apparently Sergei's mom had not been living at their home for quite some time, like maybe 2 years, I think. But the thing is, Nikolai is not exactly shedding tears over this, mostly because he thinks that their mother was weak, sick in the head, so to speak, and she just wasn't in her right mind overall. Of course, Sergei is blaming his father for all this, but Dmitri tries playing peacemaker and asks if they're going to go to her funeral. But Nikolai says that they're not. After all, since she killed herself, they think that she doesn't deserve a funeral. Nice guy. And ultimately he decides that rather than honoring the dead, they're gonna go hunting for sport, for fun, all put simply. But ultimately, the main reason why they're all going hunting is because Nikolai has heard rumors that there are mountain lions currently running around in Africa, and he wants to be able to shoot one and make a legend of himself. On top of that, he wants to try and teach both of his kids strength and courage, and he thinks that a hunting trip is the perfect opportunity for this. So, yeah, he tells them, your mom's dead, now we're going hunting. There you go. However, as the Kravenov clan goes to Africa, we cut to a young girl named Calypso, as she and her parents are in Africa to just do some sightseeing, and they're basically making a stop off at Calypso's grandmother's place. As such, Calypso and her grandmother get to talking, and it turns out Calypso's grandma has a bit of mystical voodoo going on with her, as she has a collection of tarot cards that she likes to read off. And Calypso's grandma just pretty much tells her that she has the same gift, and so Calypso does a tarot reading. And basically, through the various signs that she gets, Calypso is able to interpret that something important is going to be happening soon, some kind of great disaster, and whatever this disaster was, it'll result in great strength that may not actually be good in the long run. Either way, to try and kind of prepare Calypso for this, her grandma ends up giving her this strange vial containing a toxin that has been passed down through their family for a long time, telling her that when the time is right, it will do Calypso well. As such, after that is done, Calypso goes off with her parents so they can go take pictures of wildlife, but in the meantime, back with the Kravenov clan, they and their hunting party are just kind of going through the fields of Africa, trying to find game to hunt. Of course, Sergei thinks this is all crap, but Nikolai is still trying to push his kids into being stronger individuals, especially Dmitri, because compared to Sergei, Dmitri is not exactly a strong child. As compared to Sergei, Dmitri is rather weak-willed, something that Nikolai is disgusted by. I'll say this right now, Nikolai never outright states he hates Dmitri. In fact, I dare say that despite Dmitri's status as an illegitimate child, because yeah, he is an illegitimate child. Even Nikolai admits that he basically had a fling with another woman, and that's what resulted in Dmitri. Nikolai still sees this kid as his son. Nikolai is just disgusted that Dmitri is weak. He looks down on him for that, and as a result, Sergei is the favorite son because Sergei at least has the balls to try and stand up for his beliefs. Apparently, I'll get to that later. Point is, Dmitri is envious that Sergei is the apple of his father's eye, even though Sergei would love anything but to be that. But ultimately, But ultimately, this kind of discourse is put on hold as the next day, as everyone goes out for hunting again, one member of Sergei's hunting party comes up to him stating that he wants to partner up with him. And of course, one member of Nikolai's hunting party, sorry, I said Sergei instead, goes up to him and wants to partner up with him. And of course, this person is this kind of wormy guy named Alexei. And well, when Nikolai hears his proposal to partner up, Nikolai tells him to go screw himself, as he looks at this man and he sees a weak man who basically can't do anything for himself, and that ultimately by the end of the day, and then when it comes down to it, he is nothing and will just be forgotten. Something that Alexei takes rather personally. In the meantime, though, back with the Kravenov siblings, they're still hunting through they're still going through the plains, and Sergei just kind of looks down his father using a rifle because, well, he thinks that it'd be a hunter, you have to be able to use the weapons, and that using a rifle is so impractical. However, as he says this, he and Dmitri actually run into the lion that his father is hunting. And Dmitri has the lion in his sights and is ready to shoot, but for one brief second, he seems to have a connection with the lion, as there seems to be an understanding between the two to the point where Sergei actually starts lowering the rifle until Nikolai arrives and starts shooting at it, which ends up provoking the lion to the point where it attacks Sergei and starts kind of throwing him around and taking bites out of him. And as a result, the lion ends up running away with Sergei's body, while Dmitri is just kind of on the timeline shaking while Nikolai has to come in and save him. Either way, the lion brings Sergei somewhere else, but back with Calypso, as she and her parents are out sightseeing, Calypso gets a sense that something isn't right, and so she sneaks away. And sure enough, when she runs off, she ends up finding Sergei and the lion, as the lion ends up dropping Sergei's body and runs off. As such, Calypso runs up to Sergei, and she can tell that he's alive, but he's barely holding on. And so, as kind of a last-ditch effort, she ends up pulling out the mystical vial of whatever that her grandma gave her, and ends up getting some of it and ends up getting Sergei to drink some of it. And as such, after that, she ends up calling for help, and thankfully her parents are able to call the proper authorities, and so Sergei is medevaced out of there on a helicopter. Though before he leaves, Calypso gives him the strength card as kind of a memento. Either way, Sergei is brought to the hospital, and despite the fact that all of their medical expertise seems to have done him jack and shit, he manages to recover, which is kind of strange to the doctor because for all intents and purposes, he died. For 3 minutes, in fact. She called it. And yet, here he is. Here he is completely fine, which even boggles Sergei's doctor to the point where she wants to keep him overnight to do some tests. However, she doesn't get the chance, as it turns out that Nikolai managed to catch wind of where Sergei was, and rather than letting his son stay in the hospital, he wants to just bring him home as soon as possible, and I guess the hospital doesn't object because next scene we're in London at the Kravenov household, and as such we see Sergei as he's looking through letters that his mom used to send him, but which basically talks about how she didn't want to do this, but Sergei's father pushed her into it. But ultimately, Sergei just kind of brushes this off too, as he gets called downstairs by his father, who basically just gives him who basically just kind of chews him out for the fact that he didn't take the shot when he could, and as a result, it nearly cost his and his brother's lives. As such, he tells Sergei that he can't let his fear rule him. That fear makes us weak, and that he needs to be strong. However, as a kind of memento, and to try and basically assure Sergei that he doesn't have to ever be afraid at all, he brings Sergei into his main office. And it turns out that Nikolai managed to find the lion that took a bite out of Sergei, and he mounted its head on his wall. Of course, however, rather than Sergei seeing this as something to be admired, he's just pissed at his dad, and he yells at him that he's the one that should have died instead. Something that confuses his dad to the point where they actually get into a physical confrontation before Sergei just runs off back to his room. Of course, Dmitri ends up hearing all this, and he follows his brother to see what's wrong, but Sergei ends up literally shutting him out too, as he throws him out of his room and slams the door on him. As such, Sergei just kind of is left with his thoughts, and basically it turns out that vial of whatever Calypso gave to him, it's changing him in many other ways, as Sergei ends up finding that he's beginning to develop weird abilities. Animals seem to be drawn to him He's developed something akin to telescopic vision, and his strength and agility have grown to that of superhuman levels. On top of that, combined with the stuff with his dad, Sergei thinks that maybe he needs to go away, especially since his dad has decided to send his brother Dmitri back to New York where he'll continue schooling, while Sergei will stay here and basically learn the trade alongside his father, which we'll get to what the trade is later. Point is, though, Sergei wants nothing to do with it, and so he ends up just kind of packing his shit and running away, intending to go to Russia to a camping spot that Dmitri, and their mother used to go to back when they were younger. Of course, Dmitri catches Sergei as he's running off, but Sergei assures Dmitri this is something he has to do. Although Dmitri isn't exactly okay with this, because this essentially means that Sergei's leaving him alone with their dad, but Sergei says that this is something that he has to do no matter what, and so Dmitri reluctantly just tells him to get lost. As such, Sergei makes his way to Russia to the campsite, and sure enough, he begins little by little exploring more of his abilities, and I actually admit I do like these scenes, because I do kind of like seeing young Sergei learning more about his newfound powers and what he can and can't do. And he even manages to test out these new abilities, as while he's just kind of running around this land, he ends up hearing a gunshot, and when he looks out to the plains to see what it is, he's able to see various poachers as they're hunting animals and basically cutting off their horns, resulting in Sergei running to meet them and taking out a few of the guards using whatever he has on standby. As such, from there, the film basically takes place 16 years later in the present day, as Sergei, for the last several years, has managed to hone his powers and his hunting prowess to the point where he has made a name for himself in the criminal underworld as the Hunter, although he's now taken to calling himself Kraven, although the only people that know that that's what his name is end up dead. And basically, for the last few years, he's been using his newfound talent and skills to basically just kill criminals. He goes around the world and basically just finds people that he thinks deserve to die, and he takes them out by any means that he can, either by sneaking in on them, poisoning them, gutting them, basically just taking them out Hitman style in the most violent and gruesome ways. And his most latest kill is a criminal named Cherny, who's basically locked up in a gulag in Russia, and in order to get to him, Kraven ends up finding one of the prisoners who's being transported there while he's on a rest stop, kills him, and then takes his place, allowing him to get into the prison and get close to Cherny after he pisses off some of Cherny's men. As a result, Kraven ends up killing the guy, and he manages to make a somewhat clean getaway from the prison. I say somewhat because he does set off several alarms, but he manages to get away in the middle of a snowstorm before he manages to hitch a ride with a trusted ally whom I don't think we actually see anymore in the movie. Although I think she is present in the movie, we just never see this particular character again on screen, so there you go. Either way, though, the death of Cherny does lead to various consequences in the criminal underworld, and we see those consequences in the form of our main villain for the movie, who, it turns out the main villain is the Alexei guy from the beginning of the movie, as it turns out that ever since his talk with Nikolai, he's managed to make a name for himself in the criminal underworld, because the trade business that Nikolai works with, he's a mobster. He's a gangster, and the Kravinovs are big names in the criminal underworld. And basically, Alexei has found a way to make himself strong, as before he was frail and sick and so forth, but now he's a lot more confident and sure of himself and ready to just kind of assert his dominance on whoever he needs to. That sounds dirtier the way I say it. Point is, he's now big and in charge, and apparently he calls himself the Rhino. But ultimately, he hears about Cherny's death in the prison, and he decides to kind of take advantage of this opportunity to basically muscle in on Cherny's territory. And as such, he ends up calling many of Cherny's men to a meeting spot, and we soon learn a little bit why he's called the Rhino, because you see, Alexei carries around this backpack that has a little tube that feeds into a little port on his hip. And, well, as we learn later in the movie, apparently this backpack has medicine that once he detaches it from the little tube Well, it results in Alexei changing into something stronger, something brittle, something with harder skin. Something that he demonstrates as when he calls Cherney's men to the meeting spot, he tells them that he wants to partner with any of them in order to muscle in on Cherney's territory, and he basically says best pitch wins. Their response is to shoot him, but at this point he's already detached the medicine tube, and well, we see that that his skin is now becoming rock hard to the point where bullets don't even phase him anymore. I mean, the impact caused him to fall over, but ultimately he's fine, and we see that he's actually, and we see that basically even without even using his strength, he has friends in high places, as he has a sniper rifle trained on this site, and basically the snipers end up taking out anyone that would dare shoot at Alexei. As such, it eventually just comes down to two people who realize that they cannot fuck with this guy, and as a result, one of them ends up shooting the other, and he ends up becoming Alexei's new partner in muscling on Cherney's territory. In the meantime, though, there are other criminals at work here as we cut to a little nightclub in London, and we see that Dimitri is actually doing well for himself, as he's now in charge of his own club, and how he typically spends his nights is playing on the piano, just doing his own thing. And apparently, in the years since we've seen Dimitri, he's developed a new talent of his own. He's basically trained himself to the point where he can perfectly mimic anyone's voice to an almost unbelievable degree. Something that he demonstrates in the club, as he's able to do covers of songs so perfectly to the point where you would swear it's the original singer singing the songs. Something that's demonstrated as we see Nikolai coming in to a business transaction, as he talks to one of Cherney's men intending to move in on his territory, and he basically talks about how he knows this getting tongue-tied. Point is, Dimitri ends up singing a song in the vernacular of one of Nikolai's favorite singers, and he just says he does it for me. He does it for me because he knows I love these guys. But either way, putting that aside, Nikolai tries talking with this man with the intent of muscling on Cherney's territory, but he eventually learns that Cherney's territory has already been claimed, and when he asks to know who the hell did it, well, the guy just tells Nikolai the Rhino sends his regards, and we end up seeing that a few people at Dimitri's club are working for the Rhino, as they all pull guns on Nikolai and begin shooting at him. Of course, as the violence goes down, Dimitri ducks under his piano and hides, but eventually all of the hitmen are taken out, and while Nikolai has sustained a bullet wound in his arm, he's otherwise fine. Although he is angry that his son didn't do anything to fight back, and so he basically just calls him weak and just kind of shows him aside. A shame that he didn't even try to defend himself. It's, again, harsh, but I'll get to my thoughts on this later. Point is, the hit failed, and the Rhino, and going back to the Rhino, he's not exactly happy that one of his biggest rivals is still in one piece and could still try muscling in on his territory. In the meantime, though, with Kraven, after the latest hit, so to speak, he returns back to his compound where he has lived ever since, and the thing is, on this land, there's this big glass dome that I'm guessing belongs to the Kravenovs, and basically, Sergei has crafted it into his own little home away from home. The Kraven Cave, as I like to call it, as it's outfitted with all the weapons he uses and everything that he does. And he basically just stays alive by living off the land, eating fish, and just taking what he needs in order to survive. However, despite Kraven having been away from home for so long, Dimitri and him are still somewhat in contact, and Dimitri calls him and basically just invites him to come for his birthday. As such, after Sergei ends up taking out a few poachers that come onto his land in order to kill people, and then subsequently follows the lead poacher back to America to try and take out both him and his boss, Sergei ends up going to meet with his brother for his birthday. Although before he does that, he also pops in on a funeral, as a lawyer who went after Chermy and was probably the one that helped put him in prison, was murdered, and of course, everyone honors her. But the main reason he's going to this funeral? It's because Calypso is here. And basically, ever since Kraven woke up in the hospital all those years ago, he's been looking for Calypso, especially since he knows that she's the one that gave him that card. As such, now that he's found her, he basically just tells her that he basically tells her that he's sorry for her loss, but he knows who she is, and likewise she eventually recognizes him as the boy she saved all those years ago. But he basically just tells her that he took Chermy out, and part of the reason why he did it was to kind of be a thank you to Calypso for saving his life all those years ago. And the thing is, while Calypso isn't exactly happy that Kraven took out this guy, at the same time, she's not going to shed any tears either. As such, Kraven ends up offering Calypso a kind of partnership because he tells her that he knows that the criminal justice system is broken, that bad people can slip through the cracks, and the people that do deserve justice don't end up always getting it. And so he basically just tells Calypso, if you can find me the names of people, I can go take them out, and your hands are clean, criminals are off the street, and I get to take out bad guys. Everybody wins. And Calypso, while she doesn't end up saying yes to this deal, she doesn't end up saying no either, and she just tells Kraven that she wants to think about it. Although she does warn Kraven to be careful because this road that he's going down, it will have consequences, and it may come back to bite the people he loves. And she has more reason to believe that because after she met with Kraven at the funeral, she did do research on him and learn more about what he was. Either way, though, like I said, Kraven does eventually go to meet with his brother, and they end up having a birthday dinner at his brother's club as Dmitri tells Sergei about what happened at the club and how, well, he kind of just ran away and hid. And quite frankly, it's not just Nikolai who's disappointed in Dmitri's behavior, but Dmitri himself is also ashamed because, well, it's in times of crisis that people learn who they truly are, and Dmitri just learned that he's a coward, and he does not like the person that he is. And while Sergei tries to assuring his brother that he is who he is, he doesn't have to be ashamed, and fear is a natural response in this sort of thing, well, Dmitri is not happy with does not like the fact that he is this way. He thinks he's actually a little ashamed. And either way, the two of them do manage to actually talk, and they do seem to have a good enough time until Nikolai enters the fray. As he basically just popped in, and he was also invited to the birthday party, and he gives Dmitri a birthday hug, gives him some wine, and they all just have a toast to Dmitri's health. Although Kraven is not exactly enthused to see his dad, and while he does him the courtesy of at least giving him a handshake, he does not show any love towards the man who helped sire him. Either way, though, party goes off without a hitch, and basically Dmitri gets so drunk that Kraven has to help him get home. It's actually pretty amusing. Although when Kraven tries spending the night at his brother's place, he has to leave because all the noise going on in the apartment ends up basically having such sensory impact on Kraven that he decides he wants to go sleep in the park, which might have helped Kraven in the long run, but screwed over his brother, because the next day when Sergei goes back to his brother's apartment, he finds the place ransacked and Dmitri kidnapped. And when Kraven runs to see what happened to him, he sees the people who had done this as they're dragging Dmitri out to a black van. As such, Kraven ends up jumping out of the apartment building, and he ends up chasing the car throughout the streets. And while he does manage to catch up to it, sadly he's too little, too late in saving his brother, as his brothers eventually move to a chopper. And while Kraven tries holding onto it, even throwing a net which drags him along and drags him through a river, well, by the end, Kraven ends up losing it. And as a result, Kraven is mighty pissed about what's going on, and so he ends up going to Calypso, and he just wants her help, as at this point, even if she doesn't want to help him with this whole take out criminals and killing them thing, these people kidnapped his brother. It's kind of a little personal at this point, and so Calypso decides that she will help him, as Kraven was able to get enough identifying factors from the lead mercenary in this group that maybe Calypso can put her feelers out and learn who did this. And sure enough, we do end up learning who did it. It was the Rhino. Why? Well, it turns out that after the failed assassination of Nikolai Kravenov, his right-hand man brought him a thumb drive that was just slipped under his door. And when Alexei ends up popping the thumb drive into his laptop, it turns out the thumb drive has security footage of the Russian prison that Kraven attacked. And sure enough, the security footage is able to identify Sergei right there. And as a result, once Alexei realizes that the guy who took out Cherny was the son of one of his greatest rivals, he decides he needs to take him out. And likewise, he knows someone that might be interested in taking out Kraven. Specifically, this man known only as the Foreigner, someone who according to the Rhino, has been obsessed with Kraven for some time and has been hunting him ever since. And I'll give credit where it's due. In concept, the Foreigner is definitely a creepy ass villain too, as his main gimmick is that he always wears like a pair of sunglasses, and the instant he takes them off and you can make eye contact with him, you basically are frozen in time. You're basically just frozen, allowing him to just kind of move around freely and do whatever he wants. And by the time that you lose eye contact with him, he's already gotten you into a position where he can just kill you without a second thought. That actually sounds creepy. Sadly, in execution, he's not that great. But again, we'll get to that. Either way, the Rhino is able to put enough of his feelers out, when he does kidnap Dmitri to try and keep up appearances, he does send a ransom demand back to Nikolai, and complete with one of Dmitri's fingers, and pretty much his demands are simple. Nikolai pays him $20 million within 48 hours, or else his son dies. And while Kraven wants his dad to just pay the money and get his brother back, Nikolai says that he can't do it because it's a matter of principles at this point. That if he does pay it, he'll look weak, and even if he does end up giving the money, there is no guarantee that they'll deliver the son back in one piece. They'll probably just kill him anyway. And Nikolai knows that this is probably a very likely outcome because it's exactly what he would do if he was in the situation. Point is, Nikolai's not going to be doing jack shit to help Dmitri at this point, and so Dmitri is just pretty much fucked. Thankfully, though, Calypso's search for the mercenary that took Dmitri does seem to bear fruit, as one of her contacts on the street does give her an address in Turkey. And as such, Calypso gives this address to Kraven, who in turn immediately takes a plane out to Turkey so he can find the mercenary. Only problem was, this was a trap, as it turns out the Foreigner had gotten to the Calypso's contact, and as a result, excuse me one second. Sorry, I was very thirsty. Either way, as a result, while the information that he gave Calypso was valid information, it's also leading Kraven right into a trap. And as a result, after Calypso's contact gives her this information, he meets up with the Foreigner, and the Foreigner kills him to tie up any loose ends. Either way, though, Kraven heads out to Turkey and goes to where the mercenary is, which in this case is a monastery, and this does lead to him just kind of sneaking around Metal Gear style behind soldiers before he eventually gets to the top floor and gets into an admittedly cool fight scene against a bunch of the mercenary's guards before he eventually comes face to face with the head mercenary, and he ends up holding him out of a window demanding to know who took Dmitri. And the guy pretty much tells Kraven that it was the Rhino. And he also tells Kraven that they know who he is, even calling Kraven by name, which surprises Sergei, because the only people who call him Kraven are people that he's hunted, and those people are usually dead. So the fact that someone does have his name is slightly concerning. However, he doesn't have much time to wonder about this, because in the distance, the Foreigner was watching all this go down, and he's got a rocket launcher, which he proceeds to shoot at the monastery, knocking Kraven and the mercenary he was interrogating right out of a window, and causing the whole mountain the monastery is on to come crumbling and crashing on top of Sergei and this mercenary. As such, it's assumed that Sergei is dead, and back with the Rhino, he basically just has a talk with Dmitri. He tells him that he's sorry for putting him through all this and sorry for cutting off his finger. It's collateral damage, you know how it is. But he basically just undoes Dmitri's knots and walks and talks with him, pretty much telling him that part of the reason as Alexei explains, that part of the reason he is the way he is because of Dmitri's father. As after the meeting with Nikolai, it basically inspired Alexei to improve himself, so to speak, become stronger. And, well, it turns out that the reason that all the stuff with his skin, well, This was something done with the help of a certain doctor, a man by the name of Dr. Miles Warren, who had apparently been experimenting with genetic augmentation, been able to make someone stronger. And the thing is, like I said earlier, Alexei was a very weak man. He was always sick. No one could ever figure out what was wrong with him. And so the instant he learned about this procedure, he signed up immediately. And to put it simply, the procedure was a resounding success, as it pretty much just hardened Alexei's skin to a rough degree and basically made him almost invulnerable. Vulnerable, which is why he calls himself the Rhino, as with this procedure, he is quite literally a rhino, as when he's fully transformed, he's basically half rhino, half man. The only problem with this procedure is that his extra muscle causes Alexei extreme amounts of pain, which is why he has the backpack on him, which he has basically his med pack, as the med pack is full of a mix of various medicines that he uses to basically keep himself stable. And as long as the medicine is plugged into him, he's normal, he's fine, he's healthy, he's good, he can walk around. But if he ever wants to, kick ass and make an example out of someone, all he has to do is unplug the med pack and then he'll go full rhino. With basically the longer that the medicine isn't being pumped into him, it's basically going on, let me put it this way. From the instant he unplugs the medicine pack, he begins transforming into the rhino. And the longer it's unplugged, the more he transforms until he fully turns into a rhino man. Point is, he's now made himself stronger to the point where he thinks he can take out anyone, and he thinks that with Kraven dead, the Rhino thinks it's basically time to move in on the Kravenov family and all the territory they own, and he wants Dmitri to be by his side, especially since Dmitri is an illegitimate son, a coward, and he was unwanted, unloved, and if he sided with the Rhino, he could be big and make something of himself, especially since he is still technically a Kravenov, so his name would still mean something even though his dad would probably be thrown out of the picture. And while Dmitri admits that what the Rhino is selling him does sound tantalizing, well, he's not going for it. He will not, but despite his status as the illegitimate coward of the family, he is not going to betray said family, which does piss the Rhino off to the point where he ends up holding Dmitri at gunpoint. But he ends up stalling because guess what? Kraven didn't die. As when the Rhino's men went to go dig him up, Kraven, it turns out, had already dug himself out and then proceeded to kill Alexei's men. As such, Alexei realizes that it's still within his best interest to keep Dmitri alive, so he does. Although something I'm forgetting to mention here. This is where Dmitri first learns that his brother is the Hunter. As the thing is, the words of the Hunter have spread throughout the criminal underworld, but he's been at best a legend. No one's ever really seen him, and those that have don't live to tell the tale. So when Dmitri learns from the Rhino that his brother is the Hunter, or Kraven the Hunter, he's a little surprised, but ultimately when he sees the proof that his brother really has been going around the world hunting criminals, well, he doesn't really know how to take it in. Either way, though, back with Kraven, after he kills the Rhino's men, he ends up calling Calypso and pretty much lets her know that the Rhino is onto him and he may be after Calypso as well. So it's probably within her best interest to try and run as soon as possible. Something that Calypso ends up agreeing with because she ends up seeing a bunch of shady men entering her office that she's never seen before. And as such, she ends up leaving before they can get to her office specifically. I mean, they entered her office building and then, you know what I mean. And she manages to basically hitch a ride to Russia via a plane, where she ends up eventually meeting with Kraven officially, where they end up going to his compound, where they end up going to his camping ground. As such, from there, Kraven knows that if he wants to save his brother, then he's gonna need to face the Rhino mano a mano. Eventually the Rhino does end up calling Kraven out, quite literally in this case, as he has Dmitri call Kraven, and then after Dmitri apologizes to Kraven for this because he was forced to make the call, the Rhino ends up taking the phone call and ends up telling Kraven the same deal that he told Dmitri, that he wants to move in his father's territory and he wants to be partners with Kraven. Kraven pretty much gives him the rough equivalent of "up yours" as he hangs up the call and pretty much starts prepping to fight. With the Rhino deciding, well, there's our answer. Let's go get him, guys. As they all decide to move, as they all kind of decide to go break into Kraven's hunting grounds in order to take him out. However, before this grand final battle takes place, a few things do occur. Specifically, back with the Rhino, after he was told that Sergei was still alive, he ended up finally running face to face with the foreigner. He ended up finally meeting face to face with the foreigner, who came to him reporting about what he had found, and that he wanted to face Kraven head on, mostly because, well, he had, as we stated earlier, he has a vested interest in taking Kraven down, as one of Kraven's targets was his mentor, and he basically just wants to get revenge for him. So he's ready to take Kraven down as fast as he can, as he studied him for many years. And he thinks that he might be able to actually take Kraven out because he's gotten his hands on a new kind of paralytic poison that MI6 has been developing. And basically, once someone is exposed to this poison, it'll cause them to start hallucinating before their body starts shutting down. And he thinks that so the foreigner thinks that this might be something vital in order to take Kraven down. Likewise, back with Kraven and Calypso, well, Kraven begins talking with Calypso more about her saving his life. Specifically, he begins asking her a bit more about the vial of the mystical vial of whatever that Calypso's grandmother gave her. Of course, she says that she really doesn't know anything else about it, especially since Kraven asks if she can find him more, and she says that she wouldn't know where to look because her grandmother died shortly after she and her parents went to go see her last time. As such, she really has no idea what to do, and when it comes down to the whole final battle thing against the Rhino, Calypso basically tells Kraven to be wary. Something that Kraven just kind of brushes off because, well, he's the hunter. He's got the skills to take this on. He was made to do this. He can handle it no problem. But Calypso pretty much tells Kraven to be wary. That when everything comes down, that karma eventually comes back around to bite you, and she is a fickle bitch, as evidenced with what happened with Dimitri. Either way, though, Kraven just kind of brushes off these warnings, as he does end up suiting up in order to finally bring the fight straight to the Rhino. And a fight he does bring, as when the Rhino and his men end up on his property, they end up going into the woods surrounding Kraven's domicile. And, well, let's just say it's not a good idea to hunt a hunter on his home turf, because the whole forest is booby-trapped, as each of them end up running into wire traps, bear traps, and various other doodads that basically just dismember and disfigure them in the worst ways possible. And for those of them that don't end up getting killed by these traps, Kraven's able to come in and deliver the coup de grace himself, so no one's making it out of here alive. As such, as Alexei realizes that his men are being gunned down one by one, he decides to go for a more effective solution, as he has a helicopter that was flying over the area, pretty much just goes scorched earth as it shoots missiles onto the ground, which Kraven narrowly misses. And while Kraven's distracted by that, that's when the foreigner makes his move, as he ends up coming in and ends up shooting Kraven with the tranquilizer, which causes Kraven to start hallucinating, including seeing a bevy of spiders crawling all over him. Hint for the future, maybe? Who knows? Either way, the foreigner begins just fucking with Kraven as he uses a mix of the toxins, hallucinogenic properties combined with his time stop powers to just continue screwing with Kraven and messing with his head, to the point where he actually manages to beat the shit out of the hunter, to the point where Kraven's just on the ground very weak and now very paralyzed. As such, the foreigner gets a gun ready and plans to just shoot Kraven in the head, as such, he almost succeeds until he gets an arrow in his eye for his troubles. Because the thing is, Calypso was not idle while all this was going down. She had looked through most of Kraven's stuff, and she had found a bow and arrow. And the thing is, she told Kraven earlier that she was adept with a bow and arrow because of summer camp. And, well, she ends up putting those skills to the test as she ends up killing the foreigner. Unfortunately, fortunately, I suppose, when the foreigner was killed, he wound up discharging the gun. And while it didn't end up hitting Kraven, to the Rhino's men, they thought that was the sign that Kraven was dead, mostly because they were there when the foreigner had a gun to Kraven's head, and they walked away before he pulled the trigger. So from their eyes, they just thought, oh, well, Kraven's gone now. There's nothing to worry about. But, well, they unfortunately counted all their chicken. They basically just put their egg. I'm running out of analogies. Point is, they fucked up. But ultimately, Calypso arrives to Kraven's aid, and it turns out she did have more of that vial of stuff that she ends up giving to Kraven, which patches him up like no problem. And so she tells Kraven to go and get the SOB who has his brother. As such, when the Rhino is told by his men that Kraven is dead, he basically just takes Dimitri and goes, thinking that with Kraven dead, maybe Nikolai will be more willing to pay the 20 million than before, since now he only has one son. Unfortunately, though, that's when Kraven finally strikes, as he uses his connection to the animals to get a stampede of buffalo to ram into the convoy that the Rhino is using, and knocking several of the Rhino's cars on their sides. Thankfully, Dimitri was smart enough to realize what was about to happen and buckle himself in. But as for the rest of the Rhino's entourage, that's not exactly the right story. And as such, when the Rhino sees the stampede, and likewise sees that Kraven is the one in control of it, that's when Alexei decides enough is enough, and he ends up unplugging his medicine tube, which in turn starts causing him to transform more into the Rhino. And I'll admit, when I actually saw him finally transform into the Rhino proper, I wasn't that impressed. It's not awful looking, as it looks fine enough, but it also just looks weird. It's just really strange, and I didn't care that much for it. It just looks kind of rough, and looks kind of rough. Either way, though, Alexei fully transforms into the Rhino, and so he finally climbs out of his convoy as he and Kraven finally start getting ready to fight proper. Unfortunately, the stampede of buffalo does knock over most of Alexei's convoy, and as a result, most of his men are taken out, pretty much just leaving Kraven and the Rhino being the only ones left standing. And unfortunately, in a fair fight, Kraven is no match for this guy, because he was not kidding. His hide is tough, and nothing can break through it. Any of Kraven's weapons do jack and shit to this man, and as such, the Rhino is just mopping the floor with Kraven, throwing him aside, knocking him into cars and trucks, even effortlessly picking up a truck and throwing it at Kraven as if it were a fucking volleyball. But eventually, Kraven does get make a bit of headway, as he managed to grab a pipe from the truck that was thrown at him, and as he tries rushing at Alexei managed to pick him up and grab him by the neck, and basically Kraven's able to hit him where it hurts, as he tells Alexei that his father was right, that Alexei really is a nothing, which pisses Alexei off something fierce, that it allows Kraven to finally get hidden, because you see, despite how tough his hide is, there is one weak point. The medicine port. And as such, Kraven takes the pipe he was holding and stabs it right there, which does cause the Rhino to react. And while he does get enough steam left in him to try and continue fighting, well, enough internal damage is done that he ends up coughing out blood, and he ends up getting disoriented. And as a result, Kraven is finally able to turn the tide of battle to the point where he knocks the Rhino right into the stampede of buffalo, and he subsequently gets run over and stomped on. And as a result, the Rhino is finally down for the count, as we see the transformation beginning to become partially undone, as he's slowly reverting back into his human form. However, before he kicks the bucket proper, Kraven basically goes to him and wants to know who the hell ratted him out, because someone clearly sent him that security footage, and he wants to know who. And Alexei's response, which I wrote down, so let me see if I can find it. How is it that even the great hunter can't see what's right in front of him? However, before Alexei can finally die, Dimitri ends up coming out of the car, and he has a gun, fully intending on shooting Alexei in the head, but Kraven talks him down, saying that he's better than this and that he shouldn't do it. And while this does calm Dimitri down enough, the last words that Alexei lets out before he finally goes is that he wishes he never met the Kravanovs. And from there, he finally dies. But, well, the hint that Alexei gave Sergei was enough for him to put two and two together, and he does figure out who sent him the security camera footage from the Russian prison. As the next scene we have is in northern Russia, as we see Nikolai in the middle of a hunting trip, and as he wakes up from a night of rest and exits his tent, he sees Kraven just kind of sitting there at the campsite, and, well, Kraven confirms that he knows it was his dad that sent the footage, which Nikolai says, yeah, he's right. So, yeah, it turns out that after the assassination attempt on his life, Nikolai realized that the Rhino was after him, and since the only son he had left couldn't even do anything to save his own hide, Nikolai realized that if he wanted to take the Rhino down, he needed the help of Sergei, as the thing is, Nikolai knew that Sergei was Kraven the Hunter. He's known for years, but he also knows that when it came down to it, Sergei would have nothing to do with him. And so he realized that if he wanted Sergei to take out the Rhino and ensure that the Rhino didn't come for the Kravanovs, well, he needed to sick the Rhino on Kraven. And as a result, he managed to get his hands on the security footage from Russia and sent it to Alexei, knowing that Alexei would take it personally and then wage war against Kraven, which in turn will result in Kraven being forced to take him out, thus ensuring that everything worked to Nikolai's benefit. Which Kraven compliments him on, though he does point out that there was a flaw in the plan, as Dmitri was caught in the crossfire of it all and could have been killed. However, Nikolai just kind of brushes it off, mostly because he knows that with Kraven's involvement, he was not going to let anything happen to Dmitri. He would have gone through hell and high water to save his brother, and look at that. He did. Yeah, Dmitri may have lost a finger in the process, but hey, he's alive. He came out in one piece, so the Kravenov line is secured. The family's back together, and so Nikolai thinks that they can just have a drink and toast to their legacy. However, Kraven does not want to have that drink. I mean, he does take a swig of booze alongside his dad, but otherwise, well, not booze, but it's alcohol, whatever. Point is, he does not want to sit down and chat with his dad, as he ends up getting up and walking away from the campsite, and he tells his dad that he could have come for him for years. He could have come for him a long time ago, but he didn't, because because Nikolai was still his dad. Well, he stopped thinking that now. By putting Dmitri in the crossfire, he pretty much just thinks that his dad is not worth keeping around anymore. And so he decides that maybe it's time his dad goes, with him telling his father that he's not afraid of dying. Isn't that what his dad taught him? As such, Kraven walks away, and Nikolai ends up hearing what sounds like a bear closing in. To try and defend himself, he ends up grabbing his rifle and wants to arm it, only to find that all of the bullets are missing. And it turns out, yeah, Kraven took them all. And as a result, as Kraven walks away, we see Nikolai just hurriedly trying to refill it, trying to get more ammo for his rifle, but it's too little too late as a bear ends up attacking him and pretty much just rips him to shreds right there in the forest. As such, from there, the film cuts back to London a year later as we go back to Dimitri's club, and we see that Dmitri is, for the most part, seeming to be doing better for himself. He's still missing a finger from the incident, but he seems to have healed up well. He seems to be doing well. He still has the club, and so it's his birthday again. So he and Sergei once more sit down and chat and basically talk like everything is going fine. However, as the conversation goes along, Dmitri seems to be acting weird, as he talks about that. Yeah, the experience that he was put through all that year ago was horrifying, but he thinks he came out better for it. He thinks that he's actually doing a lot better for himself, and after the whole incident and after everything that happened, he went to go see a doctor, and he was a miracle worker. He gave him a new procedure, and Dmitri now just feels right as rains. Something that confuses Sergei a little, until he sees various men in suits come up and want to talk to Dmitri. And when Sergei looks at them, he recognizes that these are members of a mafia family. Which once they leave, Sergei is confused why Dmitri's talking with them, because apparently after the death of their father, Sergei thought that Dmitri was going to dissolve his father's criminal empire and sell off the assets. Well, it turns out Dmitri changed his mind. He's now taking control of his dad's criminal empire, and he's happy to do it. While Kraven tries to tell him that he shouldn't be doing this, Dmitri basically just throws that back in his face by talking about how Kraven acts like he's all high and mighty, when in reality he's no different from their dad. Oh yes, he only targets criminals, but when it comes down to it, he's just as brutal, just as conniving, just as deceitful, and just as bloodthirsty as his father. It's just that he's chosen different targets. As such, with those words, Dmitri ends up leaving the club, but Sergei wants to still have a word with his brother, and thus he chases him out as they end up as Dmitri keeps walking away, and Sergei ends up running up to him saying he wants to talk to him, but as he turns his brother around to face him, the face that looks back at him is not that of Dmitri. It's his own face. And this other Sergei just kind of smiles at him and says, "You should see the look on your face right now." And so Sergei too walks around, and yeah, for those of you who can already tell, this is Dmitri. As we see his appearance completely change into that of a white-skinned individual with almost no facial features or defining features at all, before he reverts back to Dmitri. Yep, Dmitri is the Spider-Man villain, the Chameleon. And he basically thinks that as he is now, he can be whoever he wants. He can be strong, and he can end, well, with Kraven having taken out both the Rhino and their father, all their property is out there for the taking, and Dmitri is going to take it all. Excuse me one second. Sorry, I was having a minor back spasm. But, yeah, when Kraven sees what happened to his brother, he basically is just kind of horrified by all this, and he basically wants to tell his brother to stop this right now, that this isn't him, but Dmitri once again just throws it all back in his face, because in his mind he thinks that Kraven wants to keep him weak, so that he can be strong, but he now wants to stay strong. However, Kraven, in another attempt to try and dissuade his brother from going down this route, Sergei tells Dmitri that if this is what he wants to do, Sergei is going to have to fight him. Something that earns a smile from Dmitri before he tells Sergei to go home, that their father left something for him there. And as such, from there, the final shot of the movie is Sergei returning to his childhood home in London and finding a box made for him with his name on it. Or more specifically with an envelope that has his name on it. And the note is from his father, talking about how he basically knows Sergei because he is Sergei and Sergei is him. They are both hunters and they take what they want. It turns out that in this box there really was a present from Nikolai to his son, because he took the lion's head that he had mounted on his wall and turned it into a vest. And the film ends as Sergei opens up the box to find the vest and tries it on as he looks himself in the mirror and he sees a real hunter staring back at him. So yeah, that was Kraven the Hunter. And no, there are no after credit scenes with this one. That's where the film ends. And my thoughts on this movie? Meh. Yeah, you probably would expect me to be acting like with uber rage towards this movie or some kind of contempt, but quite frankly, I can't even muster that for this movie. When it comes down to it, I don't think Kraven the Hunter is a bad movie, but it sure as hell ain't a good one either. This film is meh to the nth degree. There is not, when it comes down to it, the bad stuff in this movie is not egregiously bad, but neither is the good stuff so outstanding to save it. It's just somewhere in the middle, and as a result, it's just kind of a bland flick. And we are hit with that kind of blandness in various places, mostly in the pacing with this movie. This film's pacing is honestly not that good. It's just there's no flow from one scene to the next. Something could be happening in one scene, and while what happens in a certain scene may have been affected by what happened in a previous scene, there's no real connectivity between any of them. There's no transition. You could have one scene be taking place over here in America or London, and then the next scene it's just suddenly over here without any bit of form of transition beyond someone saying we're going to this place, and then boom, they're there. It doesn't feel like there's really any flow, and as a result, it feels like this film is a little disconnected as a result of it, and it doesn't make the story flow very well, and it does make for a rather kind of dull experience. And speaking of dull, the writing for this film is honestly not that great. When it comes down to it, not a lot of the main characters are developed, and those that are developed aren't developed as well as they should be. To kind of give an example of that, I want to talk about Nikolai Kravenov. And the thing is, the film really wants you to hate this character, and to the film's credit, they at least get across how much of a bastard he is. He's a douchebag, he's a killer, and he views strength as supreme, and he looks down on Dmitri not because he's his illegitimate son, but because he thinks he's weak. That's what he looks down on him for. And, but the thing is, when we actually see Nikolai in the movie, I think they wrote him with too much depth, because I don't look at this man and see a heartless monster, or at least a completely heartless monster. I see a man who basically is steeped in darkness, who is just also trying to do right by his kids. And that's exactly what I'm seeing in the movie. This film really wants me to hate this guy. And again, to its credit, they give me plenty of reasons to not like him, but hate him? No, because every scene that we have with him between him and his sons, I honestly think I see a bit more of a complex character there. Oh, yes! He does talk down to his sons and yell at them and looks down on them when he finds them lacking, but the film makes it come across less like this is him trying to say, strength is everything, and more like he's just genuinely trying to protect his children and get them prepared for the world. After all, he's a criminal. The Kravenovs are big names in the criminal underworld, so odds are his kids are going to be facing some strife at some point, and yet throughout the film, him constantly telling them they need to man up and be strong, and that they need to get their heads out of their asses, it doesn't come across as a man who's basically ashamed that he's going to be leaving his legacy in the hands of weaklings. It comes across as a man who knows that the world is going to eat these kids alive just because their daddy is basically the head of his own criminal organization, and that if they aren't well prepared, they are going to get screwed, and he doesn't want that to happen. To kind of give an example of that, Dmitri. They want you to come across that Dmitri is miserable as the son of Nikolai Kravenov, and yet a lot of the scenes the two have with each other don't really come across as an abusive father mistreating his kid, but more of a concerned father who wants his son to be safe. And at one point in the movie, he defends Nikolai when someone mocks him for being illegitimate. When Nikolai is put in danger, he tells him to get back. He yells at Nikolai while Nikolai yells at Dmitri. Again, I'm getting their names mixed up. Sorry. Nikolai defends Dmitri when he's called illegitimate. Again, sorry, I'm getting names mixed up. I do it all the time. But when it comes down to, but likewise, in the later scene when Dimitri's club gets shot up and Nikolai ends up chewing him out, it comes across as mean-spirited, but when you actually really think about it, it's not supposed to be mean-spirited. It's not very mean-spirited at all, because at the end of the day, he wants his son to toughen up. He wants him to be stronger. Even if he won't defend his father, he at least should try and defend himself. That's not a bad thing. And to further showcase that he at least does care about his son, he goes to his son's fucking birthday, and he does not show a single bit of ill will towards Dmitri. He pulls him in for a hug, tells him it's your day, let's celebrate. Here, I brought wine, let's drink. It comes across less like a man who's trying to exert his influence over his sons, and more like a man who basically is basically just a moral bastard. But at the end of the day, he is trying to do right by his kids. Basically, the worst thing that I think that he did to them in this movie was when he sicked the rhino on Kraven. And yeah, that was a dick thing to do, because he basically used his own son as a weapon against his rivals, and he put his other son in danger by having him be involved. But at the same time, he also believed that Kraven would come out on top just because he knew how adept he was at his job. And likewise, by that same token, he knew even if something happened to Dmitri, he would still come out the other side okay, because he had his older brother on standby to protect him. That's how, again, it comes across, yes, what he did was morally irreprehensible and should be looked down upon. He does show how much of a bastard he truly is, and you can understand why Kraven looked down on the man as he did in that regard. But when you actually look at the man, you don't hate him as much as the film wants you to hate him because he is at least shown more layers to him. And that's at least enough that I do end up at least liking a bit of him. I don't like him at all because there are still a lot of negative traits about him, that he is a jackass. The fact that he called his ex-wife weak for committing suicide is just such an awful asshole thing to do. But even in the scene where he tells his kids it happened still feels like it's more complex, because when he actually says it, it looks like he's struggling just to find the right way to say it to his kids without making it come across as completely heartless. Again, it's weird. The guy is a douchebag in the movie, and yet they want us to hate him a lot more than we end up hating him. Again, he's an ass. I didn't like him, but I didn't like him as much, but I wound up liking him a lot more than the movie wanted me to, and I do consider that a problem. And I've got to get even more into the writing. Sergei's not a good main lead, sad to say. I will say this: he's a badass in terms of hunting prowess, and to give credit where it's due, the actor playing him, Aaron Taylor Johnson, turns in a perfect performance. In fact, to actually give another compliment to the movie, all the acting for the most part is really well done. Everyone turns in grade A performances, and they're clearly trying to turn in the best. Clearly trying to turn in the best with what they have, and it works for the most part. And Aaron Taylor Johnson as Kraven the Hunter, A+ casting. I like him. He gives a bit of charisma and charm to the character, while also putting in enough good humor that he actually comes across as likable and fun. One of my favorite scenes is the scene where, after he was sleeping in the park, he went back to his brother's hotel and he wanted someone to hold the elevator for him, and the guy's just ignoring him. So what does Kraven do? He pulls out a knife, throws it at the elevator button, and it keeps the door open. And so as they're going to the top floor, the guy riding in the elevator with him is like, I tried to hold the door, but he was like, no, you didn't. And they just sit in silence, and then he's like, you like my knife? It's why I use it for work. What do? I hunt people. And the guy just looks horrified, while Kraven just being all smug at having made someone successfully piss their pants. And likewise, in an earlier scene, going back to the scene where he chased the poacher back to his boss's office, he holds the guy at arrow point using a crossbow, and he's just kind of nonchalantly talking about how he has a list of people, and that how this list of people that are important to this guy's benefactor is people he's going to be going after. And he asks, hey, what's your name? And after he gives the guy a name, it's like, oh wow, you're really low on the totem pole here. It's like, oh, there you are. Then he just shoots him. Again, there's charm to the character, and there is some joy in seeing him work, but there is one major problem to Kraven. He's not very well developed. Like I said, going back to the fact that his father is written too complexly for someone we're supposed to hate this much. As a result, a lot of Kraven's issues with him are more examples of show don't tell. We're told reasons why he hates his father and why he resents him, but we're not shown these things. He says he blames his father for his mother's suicide, and yet at the same time, we don't see we don't end up seeing how abusive the relationship supposedly was, which in turn just leaves it completely up to interpretation. Was Sergei's dad as abusive as he said he was, or did his mom just lose it and have to be locked away? Again, we're not told this. They both the mother claims that that Sergei's father is the one that drove her to this, and yet all we have is based on her word, and any little flashbacks we have towards her are her locked in a mental asylum, clearly not doing well for herself. So we're really left up in the air whether she really was sick in the head, like Nikolai said, or whether Nikolai pushed her to this, and eventually she just couldn't take it anymore. There's so much unreliable narration going on that we really don't know which way is up. And as a result, Kraven's strained relationship with his father, while believable enough, is missing a few vital pieces that really should make this feel more complete, and I don't like that. It does feel somewhat dumb, and as a result, Kraven doesn't feel as a complex as a character as he should either. And I dare say he's just not well developed. His biggest character trait is that he's a badass hunter who can whoop your ass several ways from Friday and be all charming while he's doing it, which is likable enough, but I would love to learn more about Kraven's character day to day. What was he in, like, we see him and Dimitri develop their like a kinship, and it works for the most part, as I like any scene with them in the movie, but then likewise, what about his relationship with his mother? I'd love to see more about that. What about his relationship with other people? Would love to see more about that, but we don't. Like I said, the most we get is with Calypso, and with Calypso, and he's basically more of a transactional relationship there. I would have loved to learn more about Kraven as a person, which again, rewatching the movie, I did see more of that come through. He, like I said, he can be charming when he wants to be, and he can be charming when he wants to be and threatening. But for the most part, it feels like he's a character with almost no limits. He can basically just get away with whatever he wants, and as a result, it makes him feel not as complete of a character as he should. Now, for all I know, maybe I'm talking out of my ass. Maybe if I rewatch this movie again, I'll look at Kraven and think that he's a more complete character. But when I rewatch, but watching it a couple weeks ago and again for this vlog, I didn't look at Kraven and see a very complex character. I just saw this guy whose biggest character stick is that he was a badass hunter who was nonchalant about his kills and who hated his dad because of ill-explained reasons involving his mother. It basically feels like we should have had more to Kraven's character, and we don't, and I find that to be a problem. And to kind of get even more into the writing problems with this movie, let's talk about the villains. Quite frankly, the villain ensemble that we have here had potential, but it sadly is dragged down. Like I said, the big problem with with Nikolai is that he feels like he should have had more is that he really should have been written to be a little bit more irrehensible. He should have been someone that we really loathed when seeing on the screen. And while we didn't like him by the end, because they did give him because of how they wrote him, he felt like a bit more of a complex character, and ultimately, even when it was revealed that he was the mastermind behind everything, and he's the one that set the rhino on both Kraven and Dimitri, at the same time, the man we're presented with doesn't come across as a man who wants to get everything under his thumb and want to keep it there. It just feels like a man who's trying to get his sons prepared for the world they're about to enter, and unfortunately just doing the best he can with what he has at disposal, because from his point of view, the world is a rather murky place, so he wants to let his sons know that that's what it's going to be. Hell, the fact that he's the one that made Kraven the Hunter's signature vest helps showcase that ultimately he did still believe that he did still have pride in Kraven and his accomplishments, and he wanted to celebrate them. That's how much he was trying to be a good father, even though at the end of the day he was a morally irrehensible person. And as a result, well, he does kind of get there. He's not as complex as I want him to be. Then there's the Foreigner, and quite frankly, if you want wasted potential, look no further than him. The Foreigner as a concept is really damn cool, especially with his powers. All he has to do is look at someone and they just freeze. Time is frozen, and he can do whatever he wants. And the way he's so nonchalant and skilled with his power make him someone that you really don't want to trifle with. When he and Kraven finally fight in the movie, it looks like it's really damn cool, and he's one of the few people that almost bested Kraven. If it wasn't for Calypso, then Kraven would have lost that fight. But what his biggest flaw is that he's a footnote in this movie. He is not a big bad. He works for the big bad. And his whole reason for hating Kraven is because he killed his mentor, who we never met before this movie, was killed off screen at some point, and yet he's supposed to have this deep personal connection to Kraven, and yet the only scene this guy has with Kraven at any point in the movie is the aforementioned fight scene. And yet he talks about how Kraven is his prey, that he's going after him. And yet at the same time, there's no real big build up to it. It's just that he hates Kraven this much, and now they get to fight, even though Kraven has absolutely no idea who the hell this guy is. It feels lacking, and as a result, he feels like just a waste of potential. And as for the Rhino, I admit, out of the three villains that I had problems with, I liked him, but not for the reasons the film wanted me to. I liked him because he was fun to watch. The guy playing the Rhino definitely felt like that he was just hamming it up a little every time he was on screen. Even before he turned into the Rhino, he acted all silly and weird. He had an attack dog named Johan that he played with, and he treated like his lovey-dovey pet and said, "Oh, it's okay, come on, play with me, let's play fetch, I'm Jonah." It's it's honestly just adorable, and he makes weird noises throughout the movie. The way he's so nonchalant and friendly with things, it's actually just kind of entertaining to watch, and it made me like him, even though this guy is supposed to be this big threatening crime lord. And I think part of the reason why they put in these charming moments so that you would feel a little bit more afraid of him. That who could be so intimidating that they would act all nonchalant about this and treat it like it's just an everyday thing. But no, it works the opposite. I like him because I just find him fun, and I honestly feel like that he was a supervillain taken out of another movie who was told, okay, you're a crime boss in this movie, and it's just kind of funny, and I kind of like him for that, and I kind of love him for that. And as a result, the thing is, it's clear that that's the reasons I like him are not the reasons the movie wanted me to like him. So yes, I'm gonna still consider that a flaw. Plus, again, the fact that as the Rhino, instead of making him like the traditional Rhino like in the comics, he's just the guy who experimented with his genes thanks to the work of Dr. Miles Warren. And that part, in my opinion, is just so damn weak. So yes, once again, that's a problem. I am going to have to call that a problem with the movie. With that said, despite all my problems with the movie, like with pacing, with writing, with dumb characterization and lacking in certain areas that really should be, there also are moments that I do think are worth your time, at least a little bit. And one of those moments is, believe it or not, Dimitri. The thing is, out of all the characters in the movie, Dimitri is the one that's actually the best written out of all of them. Because, and his arc of becoming the chameleon is really well done. Because throughout the movie, you understand this character perfectly. And when he eventually just goes full supervillain at the very end of the movie, you buy it. You understand why Dimitri does what he does, and then ends up going to see Miles Warren too, because it's clear he went to go see Miles Warren. Because throughout the movie, we're presented with someone who feels ashamed of who he is, even before he basically figures out that he is a coward. Because he knows his father looks down on him, and he wants to make him proud, but he's constantly being overshadowed by his brother. And while his brother and him try to have a good relationship with one another, and they do clearly still love each other, you can tell as early as when they were kids that he's jealous of the fact that Sergei gets all the attention while he's just left in the dust. And you can tell it hurts him in that regard. With that said, he still at least tries to find solace in his brother and does want to be there for him. But then suddenly, after his brother survives a lion attack, he wants something to do with him, and he runs away, which makes sense. Which from Dimitri's point of view, has probably got to hurt like hell, because now one of the few supports that he's had in the world has just left him for parts unknown, and now he's just left stuck with the father that he's constantly trying to impress and failing. And of course that makes sense why he would feel, and so combine these two factors together, you do feel more sorry for him. But then you get to the stuff from when he's an adult, as now he's finally come into his own. He finally thinks that his father is proud of him, only to end up in the middle of a big fight where he could get killed, and he learns that he's a coward, and his father reprimands him for it. You see that this guy is just doing everything he can to try and get on this pedestal that he thinks his father wants him on, and he feels like he's failing. Yes, his father does still try showing him love when he can, but all the love in the world doesn't matter when all his dad tells him is that he thinks he's weak and that he's gonna fail. That's gotta hurt like hell. And then add on the fact that he learns that his brother, who he's kind of been in contact with for the last few years, was in fact this criminal killer that went across the globe hunting people and trying to hide it. It probably rips up his worldview something fierce. And likewise, while he knows that Kraven is will want to help him when he learns about this, he's still just horrified. He still is having trouble comprehending it, made worse by the fact that Dimitri is only pulled into this whole thing because of stuff that his brother did. And and basically combine all these traumas together, and he feels weak. And learning what his brother has become probably made him feel even more inferior, because now despite the fact that his brother ran away from home, he's still the favorite son. He's still the guy his dad looks to. So by the end of the movie, when he finally decides, you know what, fuck it, I'm not gonna be this guy anymore, I'm gonna make a change and I'm gonna do it my way, and he finally becomes the chameleon, It actually makes sense. It's well developed, and if I may say, his design as the chameleon is perfect. He's probably he's so comic accurate. The way he looks, this face, his skin, the featureless everything. It feels like they took the chameleon and ripped him straight out of the comics and put him in the movie, and it's perfect. It's creepy. It's the best thing about the movie. Its biggest problem is that he becomes the chameleon right at the end, like right at the end. It's clear that maybe they wanted to try and develop him up so that they could use him for a later movie. But the thing is, we're probably not getting another movie. There isn't going to be a second Kraven the Hunter. We're probably not going to be seeing any more movies from this universe at all. So yes, guess what? We're probably not going to be seeing Dimitri as the chameleon unless they want to use him in one of the future Avengers movies from during their whole multiverse shenanigans, which, if they do that, I would love it. I would love to see Dimitri actually in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, actually take advantage of what was built up here, because I would love to see him in action as a tried and true villain, just kind of flexing his muscles and doing his own thing and being arrogant about it. I would love to see it, because what we have here is good, but it's wasted because again, by the time we get to the part we want, the film's over. So yeah, that does still kind of suck, but at the same time, like I said, it's really well done, and I do actually like it. And like, guys, again, I mentioned how the acting all around is good. I already mentioned Aaron Taylor Johnson as Kraven the Hunter, but everybody else turns in great performances too. From the Rhino to Russell Crowe as Nikolai Kravenov, it's all pretty well. I do think it's actually really nice. Even Calypso, I think, is well done. Everybody's inflections do feel natural, and I will give credit. Rewatching this movie for this vlog, I did notice there are a few story threads that I think and actually did work to the film's advantage. Namely, the comparisons between Sergei and his father. In the movie, they talk about how Sergei is like his father, despite the fact that Sergei claims that no, they're nothing alike. He has a code, his father doesn't. But when you actually look at Sergei and Nikolai, they are two peas in a pod. Yeah, ultimately Sergei looks down on his father and sees him as nothing more than a monster. But in a lot of Sergei's methods do mirror that of his father. Subterfuge, killing, taking out people he doesn't like. Basically being this bloodthirsty monster who became an apex predator in his chosen field. And the thing is, it's a similar case with Nikolai. Yes, he doesn't have the same physical skills that Kraven came to develop thanks to that little serum he took, but it doesn't matter. He's still it doesn't matter. He's still basically a shark in the world of criminals, and he's worked hard to maintain that. Keep himself at arm's length, keep himself strong. And like Kraven, how he typically solves his problems is through smart methods and untraceable patterns. That's how Kraven typically works. The thing is, like I said, in the criminal underworld, the name of the hunter is shrouded in mystery, and the only people that learn that Sergei calls himself Kraven are the people that he kills, so they're not gonna tell anybody. So likewise, when you see Nikolai playing chess master behind the scenes and basically setting Kraven up to fight the Rhino, it shows that he operates on a similar methodology. He basically when it comes down to it, both Sergei and his father are basically cut from the same cloth, even though they both operate under different frequencies. And you can see that even in their personalities. Both are arrogant, both feel like they're untouchable, both feel like they can do whatever the hell they want and that nobody can stop them. And if anyone does try doing them wrong, then they have every right to just go all in, guns blazing, and make them regret ever crossing them. It really does get across. I do actually find that to be a rather interesting arc, and I do think the film does at least an okay job at implementing it. So I do find it to be a problem. Likewise, I think the set design is really damn cool. I love how everything looks. And when it comes down to Kraven himself, I do feel like they did try and at least go the extra mile to somewhat make him comic accurate, much like they did with Venom in his movies. Yeah, of course, his backstory is altered somewhat, and of course they had to cut out his connection to Spider-Man. Plus, for some reason, he and Dimitri aren't Russian, despite the fact that his dad is Russian. I don't know why, seriously. The names are Sergei and Dimitri, and yet they both have American accents, despite the fact that they were raised by a Russian living in London. Seriously, it's weird. But again, I think the acting is all really well done. Everyone turns in good performances, and and while I find the writing to be lacking in a few areas, they at least they at least try to work with it as best as they can to try and turn in great performances. I think the action is alright enough. There are definitely plenty of scenes where I was invested and loved seeing everything flowing. Admittedly, again, it does get a little boring when you know what to expect when it comes to Kraven, but otherwise, it's still right. I do still think that that all works out. And as a result, all these factors combined honestly just kind of make this a rather meh movie. Here, the thing is, excuse me, there are enough factors in this movie to keep me from hating it and calling it a bad movie. But there isn't enough in this movie that I can say in confidence it's good. For everything right that the film does, it also does something wrong that holds it back, and both pretty much just all come together to create a honestly meh experience. The film is not honest. The film just feels like it just passes by. You're not losing anything if you choose to skip out on it, but you don't really get. But you're not losing anything if you choose to skip out on it, but you don't really gain a lot if you go to watch it either. It's just kind of a film that exists. It appears, you see it, you see a few things that stick with you a little, and then you just kind of forget about it after it passes by. And that's what Kraven is to me, unfortunately. When as a result, I kind of think this film is the worst film to come out of the Sony Universe of Marvel characters as a result. Yes, I just commented a bunch of stuff about it, but the thing is, most of the stuff that I think works just doesn't feel as strong as it should be when compared to all the stuff that doesn't work. And as a result, the film doesn't feel like it feels like it lacks an identity. It feels like it doesn't have anything of note or substance to it, and it just feels bland as a result. Say what you want about the other films in Sony's universe of Marvel characters, and you could probably list ones that are worse. I know people hate Madam Web the most, but even Madam Web had something to it. It had something to it. There was at least more to Madam Web that you remember, even if it was something you hated. But whereas Kraven, it feels like it just lives in this nebulous void where it's neither good but neither bad. It just kind of skirts the line. Like I said, you can choose to skip it and not miss anything, but if you do try to watch it, you wouldn't be gaining a lot either. It just kind of feels somewhere in between that ultimately just makes it a rather bland experience that I can honestly just take or leave. And I feel like that's the worst sin that a film can do, when it's not memorable and is just bland. And that's what Kraven the Hunter is to me. It's a bland movie. And as a result, I cannot say in confidence that I recommend the movie, but if you choose to watch it, I don't think you'll hate it as much as other people do. With that said, don't go in expecting to become a fan either. This is a film that really does not know what it wants to be. It just kind of lacks an identity, and as a result, I just find it to be a very bland, very meh movie that, like I said, you can very easily skip, but you wouldn't be gaining. You can very easily skip, but you wouldn't be losing anything if you decided to watch it. So, there you go. That's really all I can say. And unfortunately, I feel like this movie is a perfect representation of what Sony's universe of Marvel characters really is. Just a bunch of meandering ideas that didn't really know what they wanted to be, and just ultimately kept being thrown at the wall to see what stuck, with only a few things maybe sticking here and there. Mostly because they're from a character that actually they did get a good dynamic with in the form of Venom. When it comes down to Sony's universe of Marvel characters, I think we can safely say that it's an experiment that ended in failure. I will give credit where it's due. Sony's universe of Marvel characters does feel like a much more cohesive attempt at a shared film universe than previous attempts they've done. Something that film industry was kind of filled with when people decided they wanted to make their own cinematic universes to copy the MCU, was that they tried to build too much with too little. They basically just tried to build entire film universes without really setting up a strong foundation for that. And we've seen that with other films, with Universal's attempt at the Dark Universe, when Sony itself tried doing it with the Amazing Spider-Man duology that they hoped to branch off into becoming its whole film franchise. Their biggest flaws for them were that they tried to do too much with too little, and as a result, the films wound up suffering because they kept trying to build up all these ideas for future sequels without really focusing on the story that they were trying to tell right now. And I will say this for Sony's universe of Marvel characters. They tried to build a strong foundation. They really did. They tried to focus on individual characters one at a time, and then try and build up from there by including more references to other movies, so that eventually they hoped that they could bring them together into one cohesive whole. But the problem is that Sony's universe wound up having flaws in other areas that kept holding it back. One of the reasons why the MCU works as well as it does is because Kevin Feige. Well, say whatever you want about the man, whether you agree or disagree with any of the changes he made with Marvel when he was put in charge of the MCU. But I can say with absolute certainty that him being in charge of the MCU was a good decision, because when you have a film series like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, you need someone there to keep everything focused. It's like having a showrunner for when you're writing a show. Yeah, you can have all these different people in the writing room making their own ideas and writing out new episodes, but you need to have someone up on top who's directing all these ideas together so they can be in a cohesive whole. And Kevin Feige was that for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Again, agree or disagree with whether you think he turned the Marvel Cinematic Universe in the right direction, but at least it's still a direction that every piece can still work towards that eventual end. Whereas with Sony's universe of Marvel characters, they didn't have that. They tried to build a universe without something overlooking it, and as a result, I felt like they were flying by the seat of their pants with these movies. Even films like the Venom trilogy felt like that those were films that they hadn't really planned out far in advance. They wanted to make sequels involving Venom, but they didn't really know what they wanted to do with those sequels. And as a result, even when a film worked, it felt like that there was no end goal in mind. They were trying to build up a universe without really knowing what they were doing, and because there wasn't someone on top basically looking down and saying, okay, here's what we need to do if we want this stuff to work out, it didn't come together. And unfortunately, there also lies a second flaw with this problem: the fact that they tried to make this universe using Spider-Man's side characters. Look, the Amazing Spider-Man duology was already kind of doomed by virtue of them trying to build an entire universe with Spider-Man as the baseline. And the thing is, I like the Amazing Spider-Man duology. They're not perfect films, but I like them. I genuinely do. But even I can see the flaws of them trying to make a whole entire cinematic universe surrounding the webhead. And so the idea of them basically deciding that they're going to make a cinematic universe without Spider-Man, I'm going to say right now, that's stupid. Why? Why would you want to do that? Especially since a lot of these characters are so intrinsically tied to Spider-Man. A lot of them really need the webhead to work, and yet for some reason, Sony didn't want to include him. And no, this was not on call from Marvel. It apparently came out in the last few weeks that there was never a mandate from Marvel saying that Sony couldn't use Spider-Man in their universes. It was an active choice from Sony not to include Spider-Man because they didn't want people to get confused about why he was appearing in their films and also appearing in the MCU, even though you could have said there's still two separate universes. In this world, Spider-Man could have been Tom Hardy if you really wanted to still use him. Or likewise, they could have gotten one of the old actors back to play Spider-Man and just said this was a variant of one of the previous incarnations, like Tobey Maguire or Andrew Garfield. There's so many ways they could have worked around it, but Sony were actively afraid of trying to put Spider-Man in a universe centered around him. And I'm sorry to say, it bit them in the ass. And the characters they were trying to focus on, I'm sorry to say, are not strong enough to be their own main characters. Especially since for some of them, they basically just said, what if we made them superheroes? No! Look, for some of the characters in these films, that you can probably get away with it. Venom, I think could work with it, because Venom already in the comics kind of falls into a villain / anti-hero position, and so you can translate that into a film, because I think Venom is a strong enough lead that you can actually get away with that. But then you have, and even Kraven, I think with what we had in the movie, if they had actually gone in a good direction with it and made a stronger script, they could have had something with him. But stuff like having Madame Web in a supporting role, even though she's at best a side character, or fucking Morbius, who I'm gonna say was probably not very well known aside from maybe the most diehard of comic book fans. Again, apologies if that's not true. Again, not a big fan of the character, so I probably wouldn't know. But essentially trying to upgrade them to this big movie star status, I'm sorry to say, I don't think it worked out. I feel when it came down to it, while I find the Sony universe of Marvel characters to be an ambitious project, I think it was sadly doomed to fail. While I would have loved nothing more than to see Sony create their own universe of characters that could coincide with Marvel and maybe intersect in a few points, sadly, at the end of the day, I think it was an exercise in futility. And honestly, to help kind of showcase how much of a side note it was, the only reason I even decided to do the Sony edition of the MCU perspectives was because these movies briefly crossed over with the MCU and almost seemed to be continuing plot threads from the MCU by bringing the Vulture in. But the thing is, because of how these films have just kind of rotted on the vine, I'm sad to say that those plot threads are probably never going to get resolved. This is probably just a dead project that I doubt is going to go anywhere. Now, if it does actually continue going somewhere, I'll talk about it. I will still happily do it. If that Agent Venom movie becomes a thing and they do wrap up the plot threads with Null, I'll do a vlog on it, like I always do. But as things are at the moment, I think that Sony's universe of Marvel characters is dead in the water, and I don't see it being revived anytime soon. And whether or not that's for the best is entirely up to you. If you liked any of these movies, more power to you. I'm not going to judge you for that, and even I admit that I still liked some of them. The Venom trilogy was nice, and while I can objectively say I did not like Madam Web, there were things about it that I did enjoy, and does make it a film that I like returning to. But as a whole, I do think that the entire idea behind these films was just built on very shoddy foundation with a very poor idea of how to build it up. And as a result, these were film projects that were sadly doomed to fail before they even came out. And honestly, while I'm disappointed to see how everything has gone down, especially with Kraven, I'm also not that surprised either. So take that for what it's worth. If you end up watching any of these vlogs and decide you do want to check out these films for yourself, I say give them a try. Maybe you'll find something that other people didn't see. Maybe you'll find some enjoyment in these movies and want to continue revisiting them, even though there's probably not going to be a lot to them after this. But when it comes down to it, I think these films probably ended in failure, and I don't see them coming back. So, yeah, I think that's really all I have to say on the matter. I hope you enjoyed these videos. Like I said, I'm probably not going to be doing these vlogs again, and if I do, it's only because Sony's decided they're going to try and breathe a little bit more life into this franchise. And if they do, like I said, I'll happily watch it. I'll do a vlog on it in my usual stick, and I'll give my thoughts on the films. But till that day comes, I bid you adieu from the Sony side of the MCU perspectives. I'm Samuel Johnson, and I hope to see you next week when I return back to Xiaolin Showdown. But till next time, true believers, I hope you have a good evening, and take care.